Speaking of HashiConf, obviously Mark and I are going. We do have a session, and that should be recorded. Once that recording is available, that should go ahead and get shared amongst folks here. So look forward to that. Barring any craziness, it should get in your hands sometime in October. And then,
Yeah, and we have
um,
a booth, so definitely stop by and chat with us and kind of
yep,
what's going on and let us know what you're up to.
absolutely. And you should be able to find us. They have it's a pretty fat booth, so
Yeah, and it's right in the choke point to get into where all the other booths are, so it's gonna be hard to miss.
yep.
Are we going to
Don't
be
be a
right by
stranger.
AWS again this year?
We're gonna be right next to AWS.
Oh boy. Okay. Yeah.
Every year, every year.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I think Mark, you said you wanted to talk about conferences, right?
Yeah, I just wanted to give folks a heads up. So we have been looking at other conferences that we can have an opportunity to kind of share our message at. And we have a few different options. We're working with a few different organizers of conferences. And the one that we have locked in right now is the PowerShell and DevOps conference. So it is in Bellevue next year in April. So we'll be there. We have a number of sessions between, I think we have currently have 8 sessions that we're doing between the Bicep and Terraform teams, including a state of IAC. So we're going to have a bunch of information that we're sharing there and would love to have anyone from here that's interested in going join. And a call for papers for that conference is happening, I think, next month, maybe. So if you have any topics that are related to Terraform that you want to submit sessions for, please go in and do that there too. So we really want to kind of expand or see if we can expand that conference to not just be PowerShell, but kind of get the IEC angle in there as well. So I know there's a lot of overlap with the folks that go there now. So we really want to encourage that.
And in case you're not a Seattle local and you try to go to, I think there's like a Bellevue, Maine or something like that. This is Bellevue in the greater Seattle area, so you'd fly into Seattle to try to attend. Raji's asking if we have any
Yeah, so I
conferences.
was just going to answer that. So we haven't locked in the PowerShell conference in Europe, but that's another one since it's kind of in that same vein. We will probably be there as well. But what kind of presence we have there, we don't know yet. But we are working, or we will be working with the organizers of that to see what we can do there as well. I don't know about GitHub Universe. It's not one that we have in our current list. We will, from a broader team perspective, have a presence there for sure. But I don't know if we'll have any sessions or anything at the GitHub Universe conference. But any other suggestions on conferences that are important to you all, definitely let us know so that we can see if we can kind of make a presence there as well.
Yeah, if our community is going to be there, then we definitely want to be there. Mark T is saying we should go to KubeCon.
It's a thought. I mean, that's where I got this hat. If
I
it's
thought it
in
was funny
Chicago,
you had the hat on before you dropped it. So
yeah. If it's in Chicago, no, don't go. But if it's in San Diego, yes, let's go. Yes.
what's wrong with Chicago, man?
It's
What's wrong with
cold,
Chicago?
man. It's cold. They have KubeCon in November, man. Like, no.
It's blurred so you can't see it, but I have a Caleb Williams jersey hanging back there, and every week of my life is misery. So don't make fun of my Chicago.
I love Chicago in the summer. I'm just saying. Chicago in November? Mm.
Builds character. The Italian beefs and the deep dish pizza that make you strong.
Or Portillo's, right? I mean,
Jason's saying it's in Utah, so I don't think that'll be much warmer. I hate to break it to you, Mark.
Yeah, but this they got scenery there. Yeah.
Jeremy makes a good point. Mark, we should definitely try to talk about that. Seeing if we can get some community contribution in co-presenting or presenting some stuff at PowerShell plus DevOps.
Yeah, that's what I mentioned. The call for papers will be coming out, so I definitely encourage folks to put sessions or suggest sessions in there for the call for papers. And if you have things that you want to work with us directly on, happy to kind of work with you on that as well. I think we've talked about doing sessions, and I think we may have done sessions with Jeremy before. So we love working with you all, and kind of building and um, helping you with any of your projects or anything like that. So
Yeah. Anything else you had about conferences, Mark?
nope.
Okay. I'm going to talk about something I've been looking to talk about for a while now. So we've been working hard at AZ API. If you haven't heard of it, the 5-second version is that it's another way to use Azure stuff without waiting for any sort of manual implementation or merging into the Azure repo that has previously existed. AZAPI just released 2.0 beta 2 days ago. We were intentional about trying to get that in before this call because we want all of you to go ahead and use that and give us your feedback on some of the features. I do not have extensive scenarios built out for every single thing under the sun here, but a few things I'll call out. Number one, if any of you have experience with Bicep, there's a concept called pre-flight. We've managed to integrate that into the Terraform plan stage. So the simplest example off the top of my head is if you go define an OS SKU and you give it like Mark as the name, then it's going to say that's not a valid SKU and it'll just throw an error. The nice thing is that that'll happen before you try to do a apply on like 50 resources and end up with a messy state file. Um, we
Hey,
have
Steve,
some,
can you
oh, go
expand the
ahead.
window a little bit?
Yeah, let me make that bigger. How's that?
That looks
Okay.
good to me.
Sorry about that. The other one is that we've officially removed any and all JSON traces from 2.0. So there is no JSON in the properties, there's no JSON in the outputs, there's no JSON in this anything essentially. And that should also mean that you can just work with HCL and stuff like for each and all those different things that you are much more acquainted with. They're all going to live inside of here. Um, there's a retry field here, which essentially lets you keep trying to make the same fetches. Everyone, well, I think a lot of people here will be familiar with like running operations, and sometimes you just need to keep doing the get until you return the 200. This retry field is going to go ahead and help you with that. And then we have response export values here, which was a way of kind of helping with outputs. And what we ended up finding is that it's a little bit noisy when you try to just response export values like a SKU. It would give you properties, or it would give you body and then properties and then SKU and then SKU name. It's just a little noisy. We decided to use JMES path as a query expression to essentially give you just the final thing. So if you utilize that, you'll end up with SKU name equals D whatever from there. There's a lot of really cool stuff here. That's just a few that I managed to call out in the moment. AZ API's extension, the VS Code extension, is also in beta, so please make sure to install the pre-release version of the extension if you haven't. That has some really cool functionality going on. We have a paste as AZ API functionality that's in there now, so you can go and copy resource JSON from the portal and essentially do, excuse me, do a control V and or a command V if you're a Mac user, and it'll just immediately shoot everything out in AZ API. We're still trying to fit a little bit more functionality into that one. before HashiConf, and then hopefully at HashiConf we'll be able to not only have 2.0 officially release for the provider and the VS Code extension, but also we'll be able to show you some other cool stuff that is coming up. So definitely make a try at using the provider. Highly recommend it. Um, gonna help you a lot in these scenarios where you're gonna want to roll out a different resource version for this or that reason. So, any questions on all of that? Okay. Um, what else did we have? I don't, Mark, did we have anything else for today?
Not to my knowledge, no.
Okay.
We do
Well,
want to open up the floor for any other questions or topics that people have. So,
yep, that is the intention with these calls. We're not going to try to fill it with just me and Tim talking for 45 minutes. So, does anyone have any questions or topics or things they want to bring up?
I have some stuff I can share.
Go for it.
All right. So I talked about this a bit last meeting. There's some tooling that I've been working on, and I received permission that I can share it. So let's see if I can get that to work.
Awesome.
Can you see my screen?
Yep.
Perfect. So the tool that I've been working on is two parts. The first part is trying to automate the process of converting existing infrastructure into Terraform code, and then the second part is trying to visualize some of that. So I have the tenant from my Visual Studio Enterprise subscription for experimenting, and inside of it there's a few resource groups. So the tool, we can create a list of imports through a wizard. So if we go to the import wizard, let's say we're going to start from scratch, and it's going to use the CLI to enumerate everything from all the subscriptions that I have active, which is right now just one. And it's prompting for which resource groups to import. So let's say I want to do everything but the network watcher. This is using the fuzzy finder tool for this interface. So I can select multiple, and then when I hit enter, it will add that to a list of things to import. So if we say list imports, then it shows all of these files. And if we look at it, it's just a bunch of import blocks. So standard Terraform code, but the process of using the CLI to write all these import blocks is what has happened. And then the next step is we want to perform the import. So using the Terraform plan with the generate config out command, it will take these imports and it will write the HCL for us for each of these resources. So it's going into Azure using the normal Terraform code. This is just automated the process of writing the import blocks and creating the interface for us to pick from them. And the generate config out command usually does have errors. So if you generate the config for a role assignment, it will include the role definition name and the role definition ID, which is a conflict. So if you run Terraform validate after doing that, you will get some errors. So import encountered problems. This may be because the generated code needs attention or it could have failed. So then the next step is we have this code, which is, I don't know if I have a command to jump to it, but there's a second step, which is processing that code to something more like what a human would have written. So if we run this process step, it will do a bunch of cleaning up, and now we can jump to blocks. So let's say I want to look at this one. So it'll jump into VS Code. So we have the providers that have been written out. So if you have resource groups in different subscriptions, it will have created a different provider with an alias corresponding to the name. And now if we look at the resource groups, we have the import block above the resource block, and then the resource block has names corresponding to the resource group, and then followed by the subscription, just so that it's guaranteed to be unique. And it has the standard code that's been outputted. And in this case, the tags on the resource group included a value that was JSON, like it appeared like JSON. So the processing step converted that to a JSON encode statement instead of just leaving it as a raw string. So this is useful for things like role definitions, where there's a bunch of JSON, or just anything else, where it's going through every string literal in the output and doing this conversion. It's not specific for tags. So this has, I think in this example, I just have a bunch of resource groups, but that is the general process. So this also has support for security groups, which I just didn't set up for this demo. But if you have a security group, it will clean up the user list. So instead of being a list of hard-coded GUIDs, there's also it creates a local block and then looks them up by the email so that when you look at the HCL that's generated, you know what the email is of the user instead of just having to guess what the GUID is. So that's the first step. And there's a few other automations in this tool. So like you can activate PIM rules from this where it'll use the AZ REST command to enumerate them and then have you pick. But in my test scenario, I don't have any of them. But it's just trying to be a few quality of life things. And then there's also like a browse resource group. So it just gives you a quick interface. Let's say I want to know what my resource groups are, then I can search for it using the fuzzy finder, which is very useful. And then I forget what it does when you enter it. I think it just shows the ID for you to copy. But then the second part is once we have this information, we want to visualize it. If we run that, then it will look at these files and it will interpret the HCL and try and create something that's a little interactive for us to look at. So if we look at this here, we have it's obviously still a work in progress, but we have the subscription with all the resource groups in it. And then it has noticed that there's the resource block inside of Terraform or inside the HCL code. So it knows the name of that block. It has the icon because it knows it's a resource group, and then it knows where that HCL file lives. And this is using just a config file to tell it where to look for the HCL files. But the idea is that you would be able to visualize your tenants and say, okay, I have all these resource groups, but where is this actually being managed by infrastructure as code? So, okay, there's a file here, and if I hit E on it, it jumps me to that definition where it's being imported and where it's being declared. So the idea is to try and power high-level overviews and make it so that you can fearlessly perform code modifications without um, without limiting yourself to HCL. So if you have people who want to use the portal, then being able to transform everything in Azure into code and letting people make the modifications. So if they want to use the portal or if they want to use Bicep or any other series of tools, then being able to convert it to a standard representation that you can then do discovery through is kind of the vague goal. I have a PowerPoint document somewhere. So let's see if I can find that. Let's try this. There's a few slides. I don't know if anyone else has anything they want to get into, but I can keep going on this if that sounds good.
Thanks, Dominic. I know last time I said we should definitely have you on next time and talk about stuff. And then I completely got swallowed up with a million things and never reached out to you. So thank you for coming back, for talking. I do want to let Mark T ask his question though.
Yeah, go for it.
No, I great work, man. This looks amazing. I think one thing that stands out to me, and this is kind of a problematic thing as an operator, where we have the Azure portal and we have Terraform, and there's kind of this like divide between the two planets, so to speak. We always have to do this mapping between like, okay, once we spit stuff out into the Azure portal, we have to know where the Terraform state file is and where all that stuff lives. It's kind of, I don't know if that's the direction you're going, but I think that would be really cool if we had, maybe it can't be canonically supported in the Azure portal yet, unless we wrangle a few PMs to include support for that. But if by convention we as a community came up with a method to add traceability or discoverability for, okay, hey, this is maybe through tagging, but like, hey, this is a resource and here's where you might be able to find the state file that manages this thing. And then like, where is the source code as well, right? That traceability would be really cool. I don't know if it seems like that's the direction you're heading.
The discovery, I did some considerations like, well, we could use tags for it, but then you have to make sure that the tags are up to date. And I think the core loopback mechanism is that when you have an import block in your code, then that means that you can run the code without having a state file because it'll just all zip together, and maybe you'll be forced to store stuff like passwords inside a key vault so that they can be retrieved without having them hard coded in your code as plain text, because that's obviously not good. But when you have a resource group in Azure and then you have an import block, you can do a lookup and say, well, what import blocks have the ID that corresponds to that resource group, and what resources do those import blocks point to? So doing that, the challenge then becomes, well, where is the code? And that's usually a Git repo somewhere. So that could be Azure DevOps or GitHub, both of which have tooling to enumerate. So if you clone every repo in the organization and then look at every HCL file for all the import blocks, then you can do discovery without necessarily requiring tags. But of course, tags would help you get to that location faster. So if you indexed the resource group and said like, okay, it has a tag that tells you what repo to look in, then that would help avoiding having to clone every repo in the org. But there is a lot of room for automated discovery and saying, well, as a cloud admin who does have authority over every resource group, even though we've delegated some of that to clients, I can still see the repos and create this lookup on my own and see what's being managed where and identify gaps. So if a client has somehow made it to prod without creating any infrastructure as code files, then that could raise some warnings as well. So there's not I don't have any of that working, so that is like cloning the repos and scanning through it, but I have this part working where it knows that we have an HCL file with a definition and a resource group in Azure that corresponds to that definition. So this is the proof of concept that is working, and then scaling that up is one area for future work. So the config file for this is somewhere. Let's try this. Uh, the right one? Yeah, so this is the config file. So the directories that it's scanning is just a path, and this is an array that you can add entries to. So that would add more entries to be observed for this graph generation. So if you have 6 different repositories cloned, then you would just be able to add it to this list. And I think there's even a subcommand to help with that. And it also has support for switching between Tofu and Terraform. So when you're doing the creating the import blocks and running the Terraform plan out, then it can switch between them as well.
Yeah, sounds like something that like if it were running like I mean something that could be embedded ideally like in a GitHub Enterprise type environment, maybe as a GitHub application that would then because who has access to every repo in an org, right? So
Sure.
but like if there was some system like that was like how would an organization scale this, right? Like unless we built this into GitHub Enterprise or into Azure DevOps or something like that, or into the Azure portal. I don't think the Azure portal would be the right place because it like then you'd have all this tight coupling with the source code repos, but um it's definitely an interesting train of thought. Like how can we make traceability from the code, to what's in production? I think the same problem would apply for Bicep as well, right? It's not a Terraform unique thing. Terraform has the additional like intermediate, step of like the Terraform state, which Bicep does not have. But I think it is a common problem for Bicep and Terraform.
So I
So
think all the vendors have been doing a great job in terms of providing the tooling to make a consumer app like this possible. So Azure has the AZ API where I can say AZ group list and it gives me all of these resource groups.
yeah,
There's some nuance to the implementation details of that, where if you have 16 different subscriptions, then the AZ CLI expects you to pass in a subscription and run it 16 different times. So if you use the resource graph, you can query the resource containers thing and get it all at once, which is much faster. And that's another story on the Terraform side, where if you have 1,000 different resources and you run to Terraform apply, it's going to do 1,000 different queries to Azure to make sure, is this one resource in the good state? And then is the next resource in the good state? Where if you queried all the resource groups at once, you get a huge JSON payload, which you can then do some correlation on. So the writing of the imports and doing the earlier step where it's saying like, what resource groups do you want to import? That list of resource groups is queried using uh, the Azure Graph instead of some of the other stuff. So trying to be as optimal as we can with trying to create all of these lookups. So when it's getting all these resource groups, it's caching that information. So when I ran it this time, it didn't have to go back to Azure and ask for that info again. So doing the caching story as well is there's a lot of information that isn't changing from the day to day, and giving the opportunity to bust the cache if you need to, but also having it not when you don't need to. So maybe when you come back in 7 days, there's an expiry window that has passed, and it will fetch everything again just to make sure that everything's up to date. But when you come back tomorrow, it is not going to have to refetch everything because it's most likely not going to have changed. So trying to be minimizing the time to useful information so that if I want to see all my resource groups and just search for a name because something came up and I want to find out what it's called, then having the fuzzy finder quickly available instead of having to wait 30 seconds to fetch every subscription is pretty useful.
Yeah, the architecture kind of reminds me of like what the way Azure Policy or Security Center works, right? Like Azure Policy has this like almost like a circadian rhythm where it executes, I don't know, 4 hours, 8 hours, whatever. But like basically it's going out and scanning all the things, right?
Mm-hmm.
It would like if we built something like almost like that, but for drift detection, where it would almost empower infrastructure as code developers to identify drift, but then also to import, and kind of bring under management, right? Or like slowly over time, like evolution versus revolution, like how using capabilities like you're showing here, more at like the developer layer, like how do I bring more infrastructure under management over time? How do I know what's under management, what's not under management from like different levels within my organization, management group, subscription, down. If I'm kind of spitballing
So
here, but like
you
if there's like an
used
Azure policy
a
service like that,
you used a key phrase which is drift detection, which is something else that I've mentioned in the PowerPoint. So if it's okay, I'll go through this because I think this has a lot more information that can be branching off points for future discussions.
yeah, I mean, it's not my quarter, but yeah, I mean, Stephen, like Mark,
And of course, this is all open source as well. I pasted the link in the chat there. So I think I will try and breeze through this just to be respectful of everyone's time, but also try and get some ideas floating out there. So the idea is bidirectional Terraform. So infrastructure is code without precluding click ops. So if you need to add 100 users to a security group, then that's something that's kind of easily done through text, where if you had to click through the portal, that would be a very unhappy afternoon. And then being able to detect and revert unwanted changes, which is a core feature of Terraform, where it will tell you if something is different in the cloud versus your config, and then being able to accelerate healthy transformations through high-level overviews. So if we have a resource group with some tags, then getting the code for that, as we showed, with some kind of snazzy features like converting the JSON to blocks instead of strings is nice, being able to have this automatically converted and organized. So the motivation, IAC helps manage the cloud with fewer mistakes, and why do by hand what can be done automatically? I know I've deployed stuff manually in the past and then said, okay, well, I'll convert this to infrastructure as code later because it's a little easier to use the import blocks and stuff. But that entire process can be automated, and I think that's something worth pursuing. So the general workflow is you have the Azure portal, and then there's the CLI, which gives us JSON, which we can convert to some programmatic representation, which we then write some import blocks, generate the config out, which gives us more HCL, which we can then parse and do some prettifying, and then commit to a Git repo, which is then ran through a pipeline, which can then write back to Azure. So it's a little bit of a circular loop here. And then there's pipelines. So if you have the capability to generate HCL that describes your entire tenant, and you do that today and tomorrow, you can do a diff and see what has changed over time. And if you have code in the repo from yesterday, and then you run the pipeline again today, it's going to attempt to clobber and revert those changes. So using pipeline approval mechanisms, you can have two different things happen. Is either you proceed to the apply and you revert an unwanted change, or that change alert tells you that your infrastructure's code is out of date and something has changed in the portal that you want to persist through time. So you would then update your code. So the process of generating code is you generate all the code for the existing infrastructure, and then something has changed manually in the portal, and now the code is drifted. So there's drift detection that needs to happen. So running Terraform apply will suggest reverting all those changes. So we need some kind of tooling to work for the diff resolution. And ideally, it'd be one click. So if someone's made a change and we know how to codify everything in the portal, then we should be able to, with a single click, integrate that change back into our code base. So the diff semantics is if you are generating everything every day, then you're kind of doing a diff from the old code and the new code, where the new code is always an accurate representation of what exists. But if you have some golden code that you've been updating over time, then it's a process of, instead of just always accepting the new code, you're kind of keeping some older code up to date. So there's what you want, what your code says, and then what actually exists are all integrated interests. So the resolution tooling, so if you have a security group and then there's a new member or removed member, then there should be some kind of interface where you just say, yep, I want to keep that change, or no, I want to undo that change. So the expansion of that is something that could be listified, where it's just a little 3-mode checkbox where, kind of like the Terraform output shows you what the plan is, you would be able to approve or deny each of those individual changes. And of course, PowerPoint has a lovely animation suite that has made this page possible. So I mentioned earlier the user IDs. So when you generate the code for a security group, you get the hard-coded object IDs. And I've annotated them with some emails here. But if you had to update this list, there's no guarantee that these comments are accurate. So one possible approach is using data blocks. So if you have a contributors group, then there's members and owners, and you could use a different data block for each of the member and owners. And that would let you use the emails, which is a bit more natural for human consumption. And the other way that you can do it is you have one data block that contains all the emails, and using a local block, you turn that into a dictionary so that when you are declaring the members and the owners, you reference the same local block using the emails. And that is an easy way to, for 16 different security groups, you just have one local block and you're referencing the emails for the users. Here, which is good. All right, let's try that. There we go. So this was just me brainstorming what exactly would we be trying to codify. So there's management groups, and then resource groups, and subscriptions, and security groups, and role definitions, and rules. Interestingly, there's further stuff like PIM. There's even things that say, like, how long can this role be activated, or can this be a permanent eligibility assignment? And then there's policies. So there's a lot of different concerns here. So basically everything that can be terraformed is integrated, but what are the things to focus on? And then Azure DevOps itself has a Terraform provider, and part of this is trying to trace what is everything else touching. So if you have a bunch of app registrations, then those have been created through stuff like creating service connections in Azure DevOps, and some of those service connections may have been deleted. Now the app registrations are dangling. So if you have an interface that shows you what service connections are using what app registrations, and then what app registrations have no ties to anything else in your infrastructure, then that can help identify things to be cleaned up later. So coverage and discovery, in an ideal world, 100% coverage. So same thing as code coverage, where people say 100%, but that's maybe not really the best. But being able to look at a resource and being able to jump to the definition, whether that definition is something that was auto-generated yesterday in a pipeline or is a lovingly handcrafted file, just being able to jump to that definition is a important capability. And being able to automate frequent requests. So if you have automated the process of modifying the cloud through code changes, and user requests are requests to modify the cloud, then those requests can be converted to code changes. So if someone wants a cost reader role, then maybe there's an existing folder that has a group that controls who your cost readers are. So the translation of I want this role is add that user to a security group. And if you're onboarding a new project, then maybe you have a structure where each project gets a folder, so you need to create a new folder. And then in that folder, there's a new resource group and a new DevOps project. So creating the individual parts is just more code modification. And then same thing with creating app registrations. So translating user requests into code and being able to have an end-to-end understanding of what is our domain concerns and how does that get represented in our infrastructure as code. So scaffolding. So what is my purpose? You scaffold the project and then you drift away. Oh my gosh. So when you deploy resources for clients that you then hand off, you might declare a resource group with some tags, and then the client changes those tags, and later you come back 6 months and you're trying to apply some new tag, but your scaffolded project for this client is now 6 different ways out of drift or out of alignment. And if you wanted to apply your change, you now have a bunch of different changes that the client has made that you have to rectify. So if you're scaffolding things and handing them off, then those scaffolded projects quickly experience drift. So what is the goal of these things? And are they artifacts or are they something that is meant to be maintained? So the two kind of ideas that came to mind was prescriptivism and descriptivism. So saying things should be this way, or this is how it is or was. So when you're scaffolding configs, those are more kind of historical reference artifacts. So it's not something that you're going to be continuously keeping up to date, but they might be something that's useful. So if you have onboarded one client and then you have to onboard a different client, you could probably clone the other one and make some changes. So the example is I created a resource group and security group for a project. The client has made some changes. My folder would show changes if I applied that Terraform again. So this is prescriptive. This is how we start new projects. Whereas if I have derived configs, so I've taken a snapshot, there's a daily pipeline that exports everything as HCL, then that can capture changes over time, and using a diff between those snapshots, that is more descriptive. This is a snapshot of the infrastructure. And then Azure, of course, is the truth. If it's in Azure, it's in Azure. And if it's not in Azure, then it's not running and you're not getting billed and it doesn't exist. So making changes to the portal using your preferred method. So the portal, the CLI, Terraform, Tofu, Bicep, and automation ensuring that everything is tracked and kept up to date. So this is more descriptive. We have stuff in Azure. What is the code for this if everything burned to the ground and we had to deploy it again? So of course, making it fast. For unattended pipelines, slow is fine, but for if you're screen sharing with your teammates and you're trying to do some stuff, you don't want things taking 7 minutes to apply when everyone's just kind of staring at your screen share. And things can become slow because big projects that contain everything. So here's some screenshots from some of the automation I did where I have 1,500 resources, which took 26 minutes to apply. And of course, a few things timed out as well. So I mentioned that Terraform will do the fetch one thing and then check the next thing. And so 6 different fetches to check 6 different items versus doing one fetch that contains the 6 different items and doing that check. So playing to the strengths of the existing tooling, we can make things go faster. And the other one was when you're activating PIM and it has the window where it's doing the request validation, there's this is a client-side guard before you submit a request. But if you have all of this cached, then you can kind of jump right to the request and either it'll work or it'll fail. But in the happy case, which is more often than not, you will be able to request your PIM activation sooner. So this is a little outside Terraform, but just trying to integrate the concerns, because if you are requiring PIM for everything and all your clients are also having to use it, and if that comes with a penalty of frequently having to activate rules, which is a painful experience, then it would suit us to automate that experience, which I've tried to do with that command line tooling. And this is kind of a brainstorming on what the Visual Explorer could be. So I have some parts of this working in code, but this is some more brainstorming. So you have subscriptions with some resource groups, and maybe you have a resource group where the infrastructure's code is not found. And the resource group could have a role assignment or a security group, and then you can see the members of that security group. So being able to visualize this and incorporating some other aspects. So you could do policy, having some presence in the visuals, or doing the costs, and maybe you could make the size of the resource group in the graph scale with how expensive it is or how many resources are inside of it. So you can, there's a lot of opportunity for creating these high-level overviews that are immediately interpretable. So the conclusions, we can make it easy to transmute manual infrastructure into code, and approval-powered automations. So if a user wants to change something, then an approve or deny should be a simple action. Or if a user has already performed a change and our tooling has noticed that change, then perhaps we want to explicitly approve that or undo that if that is not a change that was approved but was performed anyways. And there's some guardrails and safety nets that can help make this possible. So through Azure policy and templates and disaster recovery and RBAC, we can give clients autonomy to deploy their own infrastructure while ensuring that we are following best practices by having infrastructure as code being a part of that deployment process. So that's the slides that I prepared, and there seems to be 10 minutes for questions or anything else that people want to talk about.
Any questions? Thank you so much, Dominic, for walking through all that. And like I said last time, Terrastatum is a really interesting tool. So going once, going twice. Okay. Thank you, Dominic. I have some rapid fire updates to go ahead and share with some folks with the remaining time if people are up for that. One thing I forgot to mention is the AZ API to Azure RM tool. This tool just went ahead and also went into a beta release. If you aren't familiar with the tool, we've had this story for a while now where we kind of talked about AZ API and we said, hey, if you need to migrate over to the Azure M provider, you can use this tool to do so. The biggest problem with how we built the tool originally was it wasn't very CI/CD compliant. We just released a new v1.15, and that should actually go ahead and help you out with some of these migrates. So the is that going to work for me? The way that this works is that it will go ahead and take a look at something. I just use a simple example for time's sake, such as this list of resources and tell me what it's going to plan to do, and then I can run AZ API to Azure on migrate. That will take a bit, so after I get it running, I'm going to go ahead and show us some other quick tools. The big thing that is happening is we're in the process of renaming the tool, and we are in the process of adding functionality to go in the reverse. So from Azure RM to AZ API. So the idea now is, hey, overnight rollout of a new service, like behind the hood change, break your resource. Hey, go to roll it out on AZ API, and you can just switch to a different API version for that resource. Similar thing going on here. If you wanted to go ahead and move this to Azure RM for whatever reason, you absolutely can. So it'll always be a little slower, I guess, when I'm using my screen sharing, much to Dominic's point. John, go ahead.
Yeah, hi, how's it going? Yeah, I have a question around last year at HashiConf. We chat about how ACAPI could become a first citizen rather than Azure RM. Is that still a vision, or are you guys going to maintain both ACAPI and Azure RM?
So we're in the middle of releasing a well, we're working with HashiCorp and we're working on a statement together. The intention is to maintain both. Azure RM and AZ API are considered critical parts to customer success. So the ideal here is that essentially you get the best of both worlds. Azure RM is going to be sort of massaged for you to make a lot of things easier in terms of configuration simplicity. AZ API is there for anything that you want to digest complexities for to get greater controllability on the micro level and use a fine-tooth comb over all of that.
Okay, cool. Yeah, thanks.
Of course. Okay, looks like this thing's going to run for a bit. While that's going on, I wanted to shout out what Jared was talking about. There's a learning path now for Terraform on Azure. Oh, I went the wrong way. This is something that we've been really hoping to have for a while now. If you have anybody on your team who's onboarding to Terraform on Azure work, if they want to get started or learn, just point them to this. It's a really wonderful resource to get people started, and we hope that this will be the first step towards a lot of helpful learning paths in the world of Azure Terraform. It's not too long. It's only 30 minutes. Just helps introduce a lot of the concepts. As I've mentioned a lot of times before, we have a lot of Terraform documentation. We have a lot of Azure documentation. the world of understanding how those concepts interact with each other. That's kind of what this is all for. Let's see if that finished. Oh, looks like we ran into a bug. Well, that's awkward. I love when things happen live don't work. Leandro, you had your hand raised. Sorry
Yeah.
if I butchered your name.
Oh, yeah. About that new learning path, do you have that only in English or we have that in other language too?
Does anyone know how I would change the language on these?
Google Translate.
Well, let's see. Let me I'll go to my second language and see.
I think we've only done it in English.
Yeah, we've not explicitly created it in other languages yet. Yeah.
Oh, Jared's here. Hey, Jared.
Yeah.
Hey, Jared.
Hi. Yeah,
Jared,
it's only in English at the moment. So yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Dominic?
I put the link to my tool. Would you mind opening it just for the people watching the recording to get the URL in the video?
Oh yeah. Let me try to get the thing opened. I'm just going to stop sharing my screen for a second so we don't have on the recording everybody's faces staring awkwardly. All right. Here's Aristotle right here. Definitely give it a check it out. Dominic, it sounds like you've put a lot of thought into this, and it's a really cool project. So, all right. Another interesting project. We don't have any official stuff around this, but I guess my thought is there's no harm in sharing about some of our earlier thoughts around products slash tools before we make any public releases around them officially. So there is a tool that one of our team members has been working on called metaprogramming for Terraform. He abbreviated it MAPO-TF. If you get the joke, it's pretty funny, but if you don't, that's okay. The idea here is that essentially this tool is trying to solve for Terraform users, customize in the same way that exists. It's trying to take a look at Terraform and do a similar thing. And this is a helpful tool to just kind of help you match a bunch of patterns within your Terraform blocks and transform them all at once to simplify and accelerate a lot of your development. There is an iteration of this that's on his personal repo that I'll just shout out, which is a V3 to V4 Azure RM upgrade tool. Now, be warned, I haven't done exhaustive testing on either of these, but if you think it might be worthwhile, just sort of as a cool open source project to check out and play around with, I think either of these might be helpful. This one is sort of an iteration, if you will, or a specific implementation of the previous tool that I just mentioned right here. So check those out. We're gonna see how we can continue to iterate on this, but it is a pretty cool idea. And we are left with 2 minutes. Anybody have anything? Leandro.
Another question. Do you have any news or new features for the AZTF export tool, or the work continue, we keep the same?
Check out our session in October. Hopefully we'll be able to announce some stuff there.
Okay, nice. Good to know.
And it sounds like... Oh, go ahead.
Where do I find this recording afterwards when you have edited?
I will put a link in the chat, youtube.com/@Azure Terraform. That's where we upload all of our recordings for these community calls. So
okay, please link it.
Yep, it's right there. Speaking of which, our next community call is the Thursday after HashiConf ends. So maybe we'll end up, if people aren't flying out Wednesday night, we can get a few folks into some sort of space and talk there. So just an early thought. Mark has no clue that I just thought of that in the past 30 minutes. So
But
alrighty.
that's a great idea.
Yep. What a lucky coincidence. Okay, there's a minute left. Doesn't look like anybody's got anything else. So thank you so much, everybody. We'll see you right after HashiConf in October. Safe travels if you're coming to Boston. Hope to see all of you there. And if not, we will talk fresh off of all the announcements that we have coming. So look forward to that. Take care now.
Thanks all.
Thank you.
Thanks all.